I'm Justin Rogers, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the contributing factors to the accident at 3 Mile Island on March 28, 1979. Now, 3 Mile Island was a plant located in Pennsylvania. It was originally designed to be part of the Oyster Creek plant in New Jersey, but it was later shifted. Now, there were a couple design flaws that existed and operator error and in our Nuclear Regulatory Commission involvement that contributed to the accident at 3 Mile Island. The first contributing factor we're going to talk about is some of the design flaws that existed at 3 Mile Island. There was a lot of emphasis put on the control room at 3 Mile Island. Now, this control room was monstrous, but more importantly, it was poorly designed. Now, the control room at 3 Mile Island, there was no organization to the way things were laid out. Now, during the design process at 3 Mile Island, operators complained constantly about the control room, where things were located. Specifically, there was a pressurizer relief valve that they said, hey, we have no indication for it. So they decided to install an indication for it at a random panel, and then not only that random panel, but they didn't install the indication correctly. What they did was they tied that indication, that valve position indication, to the actual solenoid that existed, not the actual valve position, because that would have been too complicated at the time. That would later be a major source of operator error during the accident at 3 Mile Island. Now, in addition to the control room design, there was alarms everywhere. There was 1,200 alarms. There was a computer that was supposed to log all these alarms and allow the operators to know what was going on, because, well, when an alarm came in, if you acknowledged an alarm, you acknowledged every alarm that came in at the time. So the computer was supposed to backlog it. Now, here's the problem with the computer. The computer, this is 1970s technology, mind you, the computer can only do 14 alarms a minute. At one point, there was 300 alarms coming in at 3 Mile Island at one time, and it took 2.5 to 3 hours to update. This caused the operators to miss a lot of necessary alarms. Now, there's the pressurizer relief valve. Now, the pressurizer relief valve that had lifted 11 times prior to this incident at other plants. So this valve was a faulty valve. There was a blocking valve that was installed that could have been shut, that wasn't shut. And these were a lot of the design flaws that existed at 3 Mile Island. Now, there was a lot of operator error during the accident. This operator error also stemmed from some of the design flaws, but it really seemed like the operators didn't care about keeping the core covered. I know that sounds crazy, because as a nuclear operator, that's exactly your entire job, is to keep the core covered. The first instance of keeping the core covered was the HPI system. Now, the HPI system actuated when pressure got too high or when pressure got too low in the plant. Now, the operators, before doing anything, because over the past year, the HPI system had accidentally initiated 4 times. They just automatically throttled flow. So when they throttled flow, the full amount of flow that was supposed to go to keep the core covered was not. And they essentially throttled it for 8 hours. They had limited makeup water going to the core, limited necessary makeup water that was going to the core. So that was one of the major things the operators did. Now, in addition to that, they incorrectly operated reactor coolant pumps. So the reactor coolant pumps started vibrating, and when they started vibrating, the operators were worried about the damaging the pump. Well, most nuclear operators know that when a pump starts vibrating, it's for a reason. In this case, it was vibrating because of the lack of water going through there. So the operators secured water, or secured coolant flow through the pumps. They turned off the pumps, which at that very point is when the core became uncovered. Now, that essentially, when the core became uncovered, was the root cause for the accident, the continuing accident, and the breaking of the core at 3 Mile Island. Now, one of the last contributing factors I'm going to talk about is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission during the 1970s was not an actual regulatory commission. They did not actually regulate on the nuclear power industry. Many people say the nuclear operators and the plants were in bed with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission at the time was said to promote nuclear power more than regulate it, and that is a major problem. When the Nuclear Regulatory Commission found out about generic problems, that's a problem that existed in every single plant, there was no way that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission there was no mechanism in place for them to tell every plant and train on it like what is expected today. So if a plant was being licensed and trying to get their operating license, if they had a problem, let's say with the pressure relief valve, it lifted all the time, well, it didn't matter. And here's the reason why it didn't matter: because it was labeled as a generic problem, meaning that all plants have it. It's not an issue. We'll figure out the problem later on. Now, if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had studies and found ways to try to solve those problems, it wouldn't have been an issue. But there was no mechanism in place for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to actually solve their problems. So once those problems existed, they were just out there, never to be fixed. So not only that, but their training program that they had didn't exist. Today, they have a familiarization problem or process, an education requirement, and rigorous qualification progress. Now today, or back in the day, back in the 1970s, it took 7 weeks for an operator to qualify. Not only did it take 7 weeks, but there was no fundamental understanding of the actual design of the plant. All they really needed to know was the operator actions that were required. They didn't need to know why those actions were required or the actual design makeup. Now with that design makeup and why things are happening, that can help people understand why they need to take the actions they take. So when there is more than one casualty that exists, operators know the right actions to take, and that's not what happened at 3 Mile Island. Alright, Derek Hicks is going to move into talking about the design cleanup that had to occur because of the accident at 3 Mile Island. Thank you for your time.